I'm so happy you've come to hear another story with me. I'm going to read the very first story from The Complete My Naughty Little Sister by Dorothy Edwards. And it is illustrated by Shirley Hughes. The very first story. A long time ago when I was a little girl, I didn't have a naughty little sister at all. I was a child all on my own. I had a father and a mother, but I hadn't any other little brothers or sisters. I was quite alone. I was a very lucky little girl because I had a dear granny and a dear granddad and lots of kind aunts and uncles to make a fuss of me. They played games with me and gave me toys and took me for walks and bought me ice creams and told me stories, but I hadn't got a little sister. Well now, one day when I was a child on my own, I went to stay with my kind godmother aunt in the country. My kind godmother aunt was very good to me. She took me out every day to see the farm animals and to pick flowers, and she read stories to me and let me cook little cakes and jam tarts in her oven, and I was very, very happy. I didn't want to go home one bit. Then one day my godmother aunt said, "Here is a letter from your father, and what do you think he says?" My aunt was smiling and smiling. "What do you think he says?" she asked. "He says that you have a little baby sister waiting for you at home." I was excited. I said, "I think I had better go home at once, don't you?" And my godmother aunt said, "I think you had indeed." And she took me home that very day. My aunt took me on a train and a bus and another bus, and then I was home. And do you know, before I'd even got indoors, I heard a waily noise coming from the house, and my godmother aunt said, "That is your new sister." My little sister was saying. I was surprised to think that such a very new child could make so much noise. And I ran straight indoors and straight upstairs and straight into my mother's bedroom. And there was my good, kind mother sitting up in bed, smiling and smiling. And there, in a cot that used to be my old cot, was my new cross little sister crying and crying. My mother said, "Shh, baby, here is your big sister come to see you." And my mother lifted my naughty little baby sister out of the cot, and my little sister stopped crying at once. My mother said, "Come and look." My little sister was wrapped up in a big woolly white shawl, and my mother undid the shawl, and there was my little sister. When my mother put her down on the bed, my little sister began to cry again. She was a little red baby, crying and crying. Like that. Isn't that a nasty noise? My little sister had tiny hands and tiny little feet. She went on crying and crying and curling up her toes and beating with her arms in a very cross way. My mother said, "She likes being lifted up and cuddled. She is a very good baby when she is being cuddled and fussed, but when I put her down, she cries and cries. She is an artful pussy," my mother said. I was very sorry to see my little sister crying, and I was disappointed because I didn't want a crying little sister very much. But I went and looked at her. I looked at her little red face and her little screwed up eyes and her little crying mouth. And then I said, "Don't cry, baby, don't cry, baby." And do you know, when I said, "Don't cry, baby," my little sister stopped crying, really stopped crying at once, for me, because I told her to. She opened her eyes and she looked and looked, and she didn't cry anymore. My mother said, "Just fancy, she must know you are her own big sister. She has stopped crying." I was pleased to think that my little sister had stopped crying because she knew I was her big sister. And I put my finger on my sister's tiny, tiny hand, and my little sister caught hold of my finger tight with her little curly fingers. My mother said I could hold my little sister on my lap if I was careful. So I sat down on a chair, and my godmother aunt put my little sister onto my lap, and I held her very carefully, and my little sister didn't cry at all. She went to sleep like a good baby. And do you know, she was so small and so sweet, and she held my finger so tightly with her curly little fingers that I loved her, and although she often cried after that, I never minded it a bit, because I knew how nice and cuddly she could be when she was good. The end. Well, I know that we all know now that babies just are trying to tell us something when they cry. They're not being bad or good. They're just being babies. But of course, it is very difficult to hear little babies cry. I'm sure that we all love peace and quiet, but we were all little babies once, and we all cried once. So it's nice to have a little bit of compassion in our hearts for those poor little crying babies. I'm glad you were here to listen to my story reading, and I hope you come back for the next one.